Shalom. Peace in our time. The hostages will be coming home. What was agreed and what wasn't? Iraq and Iran. Did we cut off the head of the snake, or is the wounded beast even more dangerous? This morning, October 9th, a deal was signed between Israel and Hamas for the first stage of Trump's 20-point plan, which is the return of all the hostages, 20 living and 28 dead, in exchange for 2,000 Arab prisoners, of them 250 lifers with blood on their hands. Obviously, this is a very emotional day and event. All of Israel has been yearning for the return of the hostages for over 2 years. President Trump is planning to come to the Middle East early next week, and while here, he will be speaking at the Knesset, the fourth U.S. president to do so after Carter, Clinton, and Bush. I won't go into all my thoughts on the matter today, but on this emotional night, it is important to remember that the operation to capture the city of Gaza, which led to the agreement for the release of all the hostages, was launched by order of the political leadership, despite strong opposition from the IDF and the security establishment, as well as the usual chorus of the Israeli media, which automatically sided with the professionals against the elected officials. Time and again, the experts explained to us that maneuvering near the hostages would kill them, yet it saved their lives and is bringing them home to freedom. It must also be said with all honesty that no one is free from mistakes, and the political leadership also erred when it wasted about half a year in futile negotiations with Hamas after the previous deal and before the start of Gideon's chariots. In other words, the operation of Gaza-City. The failure to apply maximum military pressure was a mistake that prolonged the war and the suffering of the hostages. Only maximum military pressure and the willingness to destroy the enemy led to the redemption of the hostages. It should be noted that Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, who had firmly opposed the operation, made it clear at the time that he would carry out any decision made by the political echelon, even if it went against his opinion, although he also threatened to resign. But in the end, he carried out the government's decision, and under his leadership, the IDF accomplished the mission and achieved the objective that it had set. Now, the Israeli procedure in order to commence with the deal is the following. The approval of the agreement with the Hamas, it starts as such. The sign-in is scheduled for noon today, and then the Security Cabinet will convene today at 3 p.m., followed immediately by a government meeting at 4 p.m. The government is the body authorized to approve the commutation of terrorist sentences. Afterwards, an official list of life sentence prisoners to be released will be published, allowing time for petitions by the public. Zahar Jabarin, the senior Hamas official responsible for the prisoners' portfolio, stated, "As part of the agreement, we have submitted the lists of Palestinian prisoners to be released in accordance with the criteria in the agreement. We are waiting for final approval of the names so we can pass them on to our people. The expected timetable for the deal is as follows. 1. The IDF will, within 24 hours of the sign-in, withdraw to the 53% control of Gaza mark. 2. Release of all 20 living hostages will happen this weekend, supposedly by the end of Sunday. 3. The beginning of the release of bodies of fallen hostages will commence and is supposed to start earlier this week, but at the latest on Monday. 4. Israel will retain control over 53% of the Gaza Strip until the last hostage is released. 5. Humanitarian aid As in the previous rounds, at least 600 trucks per day will enter Gaza. So this is the start of the 20 live-in hostages returned and 28 dead ones scheduled to be returned soon, if they are located. Many say that some of them will never be located. As for the rest of Trump's plan, disarming Hamas, removing them from power, and the continued withdrawal of the IDF, rebuilding of Gaza, and so on and so forth, all of that is yet to be determined in negotiations. Let's see what other reports there are going on in Gaza in regards to this situation. The Red Cross has begun preparations for mediation, assistance, and the transfer of hostages into Israeli territory. In recent hours, the international organization has started moving armored vehicles to the Re'im base area. In addition, mental health units, medical teams, and the military Rabbanut reservists will reinforce the anticipated hostage reception process. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Katz both canceled a visit that had been planned for tomorrow afternoon to the Shayetet 13 Naval Commando Unit. Also, the Prime Minister canceled his weekend getaway planned at the Bereshit Hotel in Mitzpeh Ramon. There's a report from Egypt that Hamas is prepared to freeze its weapons but not disarm. According to this report, Hamas is considering freezing its military activity temporarily without dismantling its weapons or placing them under external supervision. The report describes this as a moderate step that allows flexibility to preserve the organization's security capabilities while potentially reducing tension during negotiations over a future agreement. However, it remains unclear from this statement what form the freeze would take, whether it would mean a temporary ceasefire, a reduction of activities, or a partial suspension of combat operations. At the same time, sources close to the negotiations claim that Hamas is unwilling to accept demands for full disarmament or surrender of weapons, arguing that its arsenal is part of the Palestinian people's rights to self-defense. On the Egyptian side, according to the report, officials are pushing to include restrictions within the ceasefire framework and are insisting that the issue of weapons be part of the negotiations, though a compromise may be reached in the initial phase involving a freeze of weapons rather than complete disarmament. Egyptian sources told the Qatari Al Arabi channel that the Rafah crossing will be opened in both directions. It was agreed that 400 aid trucks would enter Gaza daily through the Rafah crossing for the first 5 days following the ceasefire. Now, let's take a moment for me to ask you to like, subscribe, share, click the bell, do all those good stuff, and especially to really share this, not just general share, but with someone who you think needs to hear this or would benefit from this information. Now let's move on to some news from Iraq and Iran, starting with Knesset member Avigdor Liberman, who made the following 2 posts on X. Those who think that the incident with Iran is over are wrong and misleading. The Iranians are already working vigorously. They are strengthening their defense and military capabilities daily. Work at the nuclear sites has resumed. It seems this time the Iranians are trying to surprise us. And the second post, the Operation Rising Lion started off great and brought quite a few achievements, but the mission was not completed. We left the Iranians in a state of a wounded animal, and this is the most dangerous situation. The next confrontation is not a question of if, but when. After that, he was scolded by the political and security establishments for making false accusations to sow chaos, similar to former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, saying that he and his team are working to ensure the next elections proceed as scheduled and not be disrupted. that is suggesting that Netanyahu is planning to disrupt the next elections and subvert them, a ludicrous claim meant to cause chaos and fear, similar to the Democrats in the US that are so in fear with Trump 2028 nonsense. Chaos and fear serve those not in power, serve the opposition, in order to convince people, or sheep, that there is a problem and they need to vote for someone else. Knesset member Avigdor Liberman published a detailed explanation of his warning regarding the Iranians. With the war that began well and achieved many accomplishments, but the mission was not completed, we have left the Iranians in the state of a wounded beast, and that is the most dangerous state possible. What has happened since should keep every responsible and knowledgeable person awake at night. Throughout history, the intelligence world has never suffered from a shortage of information or data. The real shortage has always been in the people capable of connecting the dots, assembling the information into one comprehensive picture, and drawing the necessary conclusions. Iran's activity from the end of July until today amounts to a very troubling picture. On July 31st, the U.S. State Department announced sanctions on 5 entities and 1 individual operating in China, Iran, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, all involved in acquiring technology and equipment supporting Iran's UAV program. Experts estimate that this includes CNC equipment critical for producing missiles and drones. On August 21st, Fars News and the BBC reported that Iran closed the airspace over western Iran, that is the area closest to Israel, for a large-scale military drill, simulating another confrontation with the Zionist entity. The same article quoted an Iranian cleric saying that Iran had tested a missile capable of carrying an especially destructive warhead. On September 3rd, Newsweek published satellite images showing renewed activity in the Natanz nuclear plant. On September 24th, Associated Press released an extensive investigation based on satellite imagery documenting construction and renovation work at 3 sites, including solid fuel facilities and a central complex of Iran's solid fuel missile industry. On September 18, Ynet cited Iran International and reported on missile tests near Tehran. On September 26, the Washington Post published a report also based on satellite images showing frantic activity expanding tunnels and engineering work south of Natanz, a new facility for advanced centrifuges. Due to its depths, it would be almost impossible to strike from the air. On October 1st, Newsweek reported the transfer and deployment of dozens of KC-135 and KC-46 refueling aircrafts from the Atlantic region to Qatar. October 3rd, Fars Today reported a particularly large air defense exercise held in eastern Iran. On October 3rd, Iran executed 6 civilians accused of spying for Israel, in addition to the hundreds already executed for similar accusations of collaboration with Israel. In addition, we must note the decision by Germany, France, and the United Kingdom to renew sanctions on Iran, that is the snapback, which clearly rests on detailed intelligence as well as the fact that the IAEA inspections have still not resumed in Iran. These are the facts, all from open source intelligence, and together they must lead us to one conclusion. The Iranians are not seeking a Nobel Peace Prize, like Donald Trump is. They are seeking revenge. The next confrontation is not a question of if, but when. And as this is all what Avigdor Liberman said, and we're continuing, my intention is not to sow panic, but to prevent complacency, and God forbid, another disaster. My warning about Hamas's plans before October 7 fell on deaf ears. For the sin of arrogance, we have already paid a heavy price, and we must continue to pay it today, on October 7. Netanyahu's government fell asleep at its post and succumbed to the false concept. We cannot let that happen again. Now, as I have said before, Liberman's post is in fact just politics, an attack in the government, and nothing else of value. He did not warn before October 7th. In fact, he is complacent in it as well. He was the defense minister during part of Hamas's rule in Gaza and did nothing different than any other one, despite dire threats against Hamas. But now that we've heard Liberman and heard what he said, let's look at the situation in Iraq and Iran. So here's some reports from Iraq and the situations there. In Iraq, Sheikh Akram al-Ka'bi, Secretary General of the Al-Najuba movement, an Iran-backed Iraqi Shiite militia, declared, "Anyone who bet on weakening the axis of resistance should know he is wrong and living in fantasies." And indeed, he is right. Despite the heavy blows, especially in Lebanon, the true axis of resistance remains strong and stable. The story of these militias run deep. It's so entrenched that no Iraqi prime minister dares to take them on. In practice, the Iraqi government has tried to establish control over the militias, to integrate them legally, restrict their autonomy, and keep them under oversight. Some militias appear to cooperate superficially, while others, particularly the Hezbollah brigades in Iraq, continue to resist. And every child in Iraq knows that Iran holds the government tightly by the throat. Commander of the Quds Force, Ismail Qani, doesn't visit Baghdad several times a year just to eat hummus. He oversees operations. Iran manages its proxy networks in Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon directly. And the frequent visits of senior Iranian officials to these countries prove it. Even before the 12-day war, Israeli messengers and messages were relayed to Iraq through the United States. Blunt warnings: intervene and you'll be hit. As a result, Iranian-backed Iraqi militias were instructed not to intervene militarily, only to speak rhetorically, and hold their fire for a future stage. Iran understood it couldn't afford to waste all its assets at once. This was a tactical move to preserve its Iraqi strengths. Now, an Iraqi military source revealed that some of the Iranian-backed militias possess weapons more advanced than those of the Iraqi army itself. The same source added that in the next war between Israel and Iran, the Iraqi militias will also take part. Moving on to Iran itself. From multiple Arab sources, Iran is arming itself frantically, especially with air defense systems. Two mysterious flights in recent days have stirred speculation. One from Sanandaj area, possibly a new or upgraded long-range ballistic missile. The other, possibly an air defense or cruise missile. Reports also mention deliveries of used Russian MiG-29 fighter jets. As for the Chinese aircraft, even if deliveries occur, they will not be operational within the coming year. Overall, Iran is expected to acquire hundreds of combat aircraft. Since the 12-day war ended, Iran has understood that it must quickly fill dangerous gaps, especially in air defense. Within hours of the ceasefire, Iran's defense minister landed in China, followed soon by senior delegations to Russia. Days later, transport planes began arriving daily in Tehran. What began as one flight became a non-stop airlift from multiple directions. Many of these civilian flights are untrackable and their cargo remains unknown. What matters most is that Iranian officials sound unusually calm and confident in interviews. a sign of their satisfaction with current preparations. But despite all that, here is an analysis of the situation. Iran, Hezbollah, and the Houthis were hit hard by Israel, but not destroyed. Iran still retains large stockpiles of surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, though lacking advanced fighter aircraft capable of reaching Israel. Without backing from a major power such as Russia or China, Iran is unlikely to risk an all-out offensive. Its new air defense systems will likely be operated initially by foreign crews, since Iranian forces need extensive training. Iran is a survivalist regime, not a suicidal one. Its proxy network exists precisely so that others bleed on its behalf. Unless it possesses an unknown game-changer weapon, it will sink many times before launching an irreversible war against Israel, because it knows that in the next confrontation, the regime's survival itself will be on the table. For now, Iran is preparing intensively, correcting the gaps exposed in the last war. But for now, that is all. Once again, as always, I want to thank you for joining us and wish you a happy Sukkot, and that may all of us celebrate together with the hostages as they are freed, and pray that it will go through without a hitch. And I just want to finish off with one more small note. Today is October 9th. 1 month ago, September 9th, was a strike made by Israel, by the IDF, in Qatar, in Doha. A strike that everyone said was a mistake. But that strike is what brought about this deal. That and the military operation in Gaza. And I want to conclude with a photo from early this morning of the Qatari Prime Minister happily, with smiles, shaking hands with one of the Israeli delegation members. God bless you all. Shalom.